I'm quite sure that Esther, with all the charm which really irradiates her, is ever really lonely. She doesn't have to be lonely. But let me start off by telling you a little bit about myself, which you don't know. First, both my wife and I are 86, which is actually I'm not 86 another 6 weeks. My wife is 5 months older than I am, so I'm technically a toy boy. I've been married for 61 years. I still work quite a lot of the time, but we are typical 86-year-olds who both suffer from multiple diseases of one kind or another. And my wife, who survived 2 chemotherapies of cancer, is now in the down the slope, slightly down the slope of Alzheimer's disease, which must actually be a carer. I suspect I may be too. You will judge afterwards when I've said since. And I've really tried over the last 5 years to make peace within myself between the claims of technology and what I believed human beings are actually for. And I'm a technology buff. I've done it for 61 years, for anybody from astronauts to divers to miners, for medical research and so on. So technology, well, you can stand over there. I can sit over there, stand over here. It's not stranger to me. But I came to a conclusion about 5 years ago, but it was almost like a religious conversion, that technology was marvelous. Technology could do all sorts of things. What this slide here shows in the top half is that almost within my lifetime, not quite my lifetime, the way of harvesting corn changed. When I was between 43 and 46 or so, I ran a number of harvest camps at the end of the war. And it was just the time when, for the first 2 years, horses and carts and building ricks sort of thing, and in my last 2 years, I drove a combine harvester. A total change of the way in which an agricultural community was organized. And of course, it saved an enormous amount of manpower. What we have in the lower part of the slide is a hospital from the mid-19th century to now. And it doesn't work for that. Saving manpower by applying more technology is not appropriate in a health context. And somehow or other, we've got to go and realize that into the soul. So when I told you that I had some kind of conversion, here I was, a technology buff who made things at home, hardly ever had a soldering iron not in his hand, said, what's really required to solve the very considerable problem we have of giving the older generation, which is now living much longer, a better quality of life? And I came to the conclusion that technology was very important. But technology was basically a tool. It's like a saw or a chisel or a hammer. You needed a carpenter to use it. And therefore, the first thing one had to do was to get many more people, as Esther is doing, to take an interest in what actually happens to old people. And I set myself to devise ways of getting more of these. Because I believe that if we are really going to have 2.5 million people over 85, not at all, it is in fact hands which give the care and not the technology. So I made a leap, and I will take you through a number of slides. I mean, this one I've already explained. This doesn't seem to work, or maybe I'm pressing the wrong button. Now, there are 2 words which I would like to put under my semantic microscope. The first one is love, L-O-V-E. Now, you can't imagine love without people, can you? That is something which machines are incapable of having for each other, or even having for a person. Now, this gets me backwards. Now, the word care is the same. I think care has built within itself a human dimension, that you cannot get machines to care. And I've produced a diagram here with my semantic microscope, where lots of people are inside care. And I see care as a sort of cloth which has humanity woven into it, a sort of think about it, care has always got people in it. Whether there's a volunteers or ESTA scheme, whether there are people who visit, whether there are volunteers who work for charities, or even when there are high technology programs, which still need somebody to install the technology, you need somebody to explain the technology, you need somebody to service the technology. There are in fact an awful lot of people involved, even though it appears on the surface that the people aren't actually there. Well, I've just enlarged my microscopic care word to show that if you look at it in considerable detail, there are always an awful lot of people who are actually involved with this, even though there may be different sort of people who will otherwise have administered the care. Now here's a piece of machinery to tell you about this, which I used for 3 years in Bristol. About 100 people did it. It was really just a cheap laptop which had no keyboard, because we discovered that elderly people were not frightened of computers at all. They're frightened of keyboards. And if you took the keyboard away, you couldn't even get them to admit that there was a computer in their home. So we had these devices called companions, which used a barcode reader, as you see in shops, as their only input device. 100 people did their shopping in Summerfield, which now belongs to Co-op, for several years, with marvelous results. I mean, if we interviewed people, we said, well, the gentleman at the end of the road used to take me shopping, didn't really like doing it very much. Now I've got this device which allows me to do all my shopping in a way which doesn't use a keyboard, doesn't use the internet and so on. It takes me out to lunch. Or my daughter, who used to rush in for an hour to do my shopping, now comes to see me. So here we have an obvious relationship between the quality of life and the way in which people live, but it always still involves people. It was the organizing people. However, we also learned something else, and that is that our 100 people took about one full-time person to look after them. People died, people had to be taught, people had machines had to be prepared, and such a person with a car and so on cost about £50,000 a year, so it cost about £500 per person to actually run a scheme of this nature. So one mustn't kid oneself that somehow or other there are necessarily huge savings of money which are involved in actually giving people technological aids, because somewhere there have to be people at the end of it. Now, what would I do? I would plan. I made a huge mistake. There's a very highly personal aspect of this. A huge mistake in my life, which actually injured my wife rather than myself. That was we lived in a big house in Ealing, 5 bedrooms, all very comfortable. And in our early 80s, we came to the conclusion we should downsize ourselves and move into a smaller flat. And I, who didn't mind it at all, because I, for all intents and purposes, lived at university and slept at home. My wife lived at home. And the uprooting geographical domestic appliances, which became enemies, because it didn't work in the same sort of way as our original domestic appliances, not knowing our way around, possibly being as a starting point of Alzheimer's, meant she was really very, very unhappy. And there's no doubt that if I was a lawmaker, I would say, if you downsize, do so in your late 60s or early 70s, but do not do it in your 80s, when your powers of adaptability, of getting a new geography and a new set of domestic appliances and new arrangement of rooms are almost impossible to accommodate to. And this is a very important principle, that if you have technology to introduce, you must introduce it early enough to understand how it works, early enough to become confident in its use, so when you actually need it, that it's perfectly acceptable. What actually happens at the moment is that people get their technologies when situations are already critical, and it doesn't work. And I'm not surprised that the TSB and other bodies find that the uptake is, on the whole, is very unsatisfactory of such technology which has been developed. So give it to people early enough. Now, one of the things you've actually got to solve, we've got to solve this anyway, is how do you pay for it? Because there is no doubt in my mind that local authorities who will have to sustain, accept the further cut in the not-too-distant future, are not going to be a very good source of actually giving people bits of equipment. So there are financial technologies. Innovation in finance is just as technologically important as innovation everywhere else. And we have to find ways of allowing people to access money, for instance, by taking out minor equity releases on their house, having arrangements which are repaid from their early pension, a whole variety of things. Because if the makers of sofas can do this over 4 years and they do television every night, and the multipass can make it by paying for things rather gradually, we ought to be able to develop a system where people can actually pre-equip themselves when they're still perfectly adaptable for an occasion which is bound to occur as they become older. Why have I lost it all? As I say, paying for things is important. And I have thought of a number of financial mechanisms which could make it attractive for people to prepare themselves that at one time or another, in the relatively near future, they're going to be less able. And the industry, as far as I'm aware, doesn't do anything about this. There are no package deals where you can say, yes, we will we will buy you a better washing machine. This happens to be a 1963 washing machine. But why does every washing machine made in this country almost is side loading, where you can either get down on your knees or bend down if you're a man or a woman to stuff the washing into it, and much more difficult to unload as washing and having nowhere to put it. When in 1963 or thereabouts, perhaps this satisfactory washing machine, of which we had one, was made, you would stand up to load it, and you could unload it by shoveling stuff onto the door, which you see there. And as far as I know, nothing of this kind can currently be made. So what I'm suggesting is that if you're under 70 and in the planning stage for your old age, you do actually get used to all sorts of things and get them installed if possible. Here are just examples. There's, I think, the stair lift. There's a non-gas cooker, which you can't poison yourself or explode yourself on. There are ready meals. All the big supermarkets now sell you ready meals, which 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes in the microwave give you gigantic good meal with very little trouble, no peeling of potatoes, and so on. And we eat several of these a week. I think to get used to discriminating between them, with hundreds of menus being available, is something which is a very useful preparation for a time when you might either be widowed or have one member of your family no longer capable of doing the housekeeping in the way which we would say. So here is something where there are no new inventions required. It all exists, but you have to plan for it, and somebody has to encourage you to plan for it. But if you do that, you're less likely to fall into the next trap where you really become incapable of doing things, and you will be experienced, and you will enjoy life more. And I reckon that is the first duty of somebody who wants to introduce technology into the care of the elderly, by getting them to prepare for it and buy the sort of things which make their living space more suitable than it had been hitherto. So what do we want to achieve? I call these people metastable people, because they're a bit like a pencil stood on a flat end. It looks perfectly ordinary, but the amount of displacement it can tolerate without falling over is really quite small. So there are people who look ordinary, who are very stable, but it doesn't take a lot to upset them. So these are metastable people in the 70, near 80-year-olds, early 80-year-olds. I am a metastable person. I want the community to operate this, and I'll say a lot more about this in a moment, because I have no doubt that the state will not be capable in resource terms to give a satisfactory quality of life to the rapidly increasing number of very old and relatively very frail people. And society has to come to terms with that, whatever the government says. No government has the courage to say, we won't be able to do so. But somehow or other, we have to find ways of doing even the unpleasant jobs. Bottom wiping is going to be in short supply. You have to recognize that bottom wiping is not going to be done from the public purse on the scale which is going to be required. And as society will have to take over some of those jobs. And it's really at that end where my own planning of what I actually want to happen is going to operate, because I can see that the pleasant things which people do at the moment, and the curing of loneliness obviously is one of them, are going to be easier to implement than things which are less pleasant, but are going to, a huge gap is going to develop between what the public purse can afford and what is actually going to be required. And somehow or other we've got to get this into our little heads. And this is something which we actually need to do. So this is one of the financial inventions. You can actually buy insurance like this. But what it is that you make a bet with an insurance company. And it's become much more appropriate now that the annuity trap has been closed. You say to the insurance company, I pay you a relatively small premium, and I bet you that I will make 83. If you don't make 83, you get nothing back. If you make 83, you get a pension from that age onwards. It means you can afford to run out of cash, as it were, by that time, without having to bought yourself an annuity. And you have, I suppose, a goal to aim at. But it would mean that all sorts of tax schemes would become unnecessary. And it's something which you can buy at the moment. Not many people sell it to you, because the statistics of old age are not sufficiently well codified at the moment for insurance companies to know exactly what the risk is going to be. Now, if you have people who are over 80, how would you decide what kind of help you need? This is, I think, what you've been working on. And now you've got people who may no longer have the powers of decision to decide what they actually want. You don't find ladies of 82 beetling over to town and buying themselves an aid without buying, because they're no longer a market. The market is actually the carers. The carer will say, now if you had one of these things, it would make it much easier to look after you. And under those conditions, if that is a market which is cultivated, which isn't cultivated at the moment, you might actually sell reasonable amounts of A's or one kind or another, the kind of thing which you're interested in. So this is the care market. These are the sort of things they might want to buy. This happens to be favored, but you can't buy them anymore because it was too expensive. But it was a commode which actually washed you. I have this predilection for bottom wiping, as I've already mentioned to you before. It is undoubtedly sanitary arrangements are one of the big put-offs in terms of recruiting carers. If you can get that right, and we are doing some work on this ourselves, you'll probably remove one of the barriers which make caring less attractive. This is another one. A pill is totally anti-geriatric. They're all white, they're tiny, they come in unsuitable packaging. What we have demonstrated you can do is to print pills, because most drugs are administered in milligram or even microgram doses. If you have an inkjet printer, and this is a very simple and fun way of doing it, and mix the drug with the ink, you can actually print a piece of rice paper which has got all your drugs on it, and you eat one of them every day, and you dispense it like cigarette papers with a beautiful, and I say we have made things like this. There is an enormous amount of work to be done, because the bioavailability of drugs will have to be shown. And I think it's an excellent EU project, which if every country did 2 or 3 of the most popular drugs, did all the development work on this. We actually have a battery of drugs which people actually take. At the moment it is known that more than half the drugs prescribed to over 65-year-olds are not taken by the right people at the right time, or even by the right species necessarily. So taking drugs, enormous billions of pounds are wasted this way, and 7% of all hospital admissions are due to getting a drug really wrong. So it is really something which is very, very important. Nobody's working on it as far as I know. My Wolff's law is that there's no point in pouring money into expensive AT equipment if you haven't got the people to back it. And how you're going to get the people to back it is this. Now, some of you may know that I've been pounding something care for care. I've had one false start in this, but care for care in principle, or C4C is called now, is that people who are capable do some caring now for a few minutes, few hours a week. They get credited on a special bank account in hours. They build up some hundreds or thousands of hours in their younger time. And when they are old, or their parents get old, they can cash these back in again for hours of care. It doesn't have to be breakfast or something, it's whatever. Care is measured at the time when they actually need it. Now this business of making care something which is completely removed from the monetary system and is something which most people will do. So that if you go to a dinner party, the first question is, what's yours like? Or all your people are like. The total scheme has been worked out both financially, legally, and safeguarding as well for actually doing this. And I believe that only by getting about between 5 and 10% of the adult population to give 5 hours a week caring, which they will get back when they themselves require care, is the only way which we have of actually giving an adequate quality of life to the increasing old people which we have. You're meaningful looking at the clock, I have another 2 minutes. So that's what I spend my time working at. I've spent a great deal of my own money paying for, because I am convinced that if I can leave a legacy of any kind behind me for what I've done, if I can produce a change in society where it's actually regarded as normal, then as a neighbor a few doors down the road, where 3 days a week you go in at 8 o'clock and make breakfast and get him or her out of bed and clock up another 3 hours. I've talked just with the credit union, which is a bank in effect who's interested in doing this kind of thing. That is a way which we need, and without it, the old people in the next 20 years or so are going to have a very hard time to do it. I think I've got one more slide. My wife had a stroke. In the middle of the night, I woke up, unpleasant noises coming from the bathroom. I got up, he was clinging to the sink. I got into bed, rang the phone numbers, and NHS Direct. Within a quarter of an hour, I had a doctor on the phone. Within 20 minutes, I had paramedics in the flat. And an hour and a half, in the neuro-stroke unit, she had the first clot-busting drug actually injected into her. So the system worked magnificently. Partly because I knew what to do, partly we were lucky in terms of the people who were there. And these pictures, again showing how important it is to have people. I mobilized the family the next day. They had theoretically 8 members, apart from my wife and myself. One of them was at the hospital you mentioned, so I couldn't get hold of him. But the others kept almost a ceaseless watch, taking turns. Persuading Joe to drink, persuading her to eat, persuading her to walk up and down the corridor. As distinct from the lady you see in the far corner, the top slide there, who nobody visited. We tried to do our best and get some of our visits diverted to her. But in record time, in 6 days, we had Joan out of the hospital again, at home, with admittedly a speech defect, which has gone in the meantime to speech through speech therapy, provided by the local authority. But had it not been for this constant level of stimulation, she had hair and sort of thing, done in 6 days. So people are important. People with technology in their hands become even more important because they have the tools, the saws, hammers, and screwdrivers. But they also have to get the right minds, and not everybody can do so. They have to have sympathetic ears, they have to have soft hands, and they have to have love. And the love is the same. They care with the people inside it. Love is the same sort of thing. You actually have to like people, to be a carer who is more than a mechanical carer who does it for a job. That we've all got to learn. And our society has got to change to do so if we aren't going to define ourselves with 2 arms. But thank you for listening.
Heinz, for that very inspiring and thought-provoking talk. You've ranged far and wide, and lots of issues there that I'm sure will resonate with many of us. I'd like, I think, to conclude the session. You will have a chance, I hope, this evening at the reception to maybe have some informal dialogue with both Heinz and with Esther, both of whom I think have really added to the range of things we need to be thinking about in terms of how we're going to move forward with the knowledge that we're generating about technology, about people, about care, about human relationships, and about the societies and communities in which we live. And there are lots of things that we now know we ought to be doing. And as you pointed out, in 20 years' time, some of us will be facing those. Some of you are facing them already, but some of us will be facing them too. And we need to really focus on how we're going to bring together the people skills, the community engagement, the resources that we need to apply, and the technology that we can get right, so that we have great tools, great communication, and proper support, so that older people are living good and meaningful lives right to the end, which is what we all hope to do. So can I ask you all to thank both of our speakers very much.